The message came through at 3:40 station time, and I was already awake. Not because I had a feeling, not because some deep ancestral instinct rattled my bones and pulled me upright before the alarm. I was awake because the coffee dispenser on Concord Station made a sound like a dying engine every 40 minutes, and I had been listening to it fail for 6 hours straight while I cleared a backlog of trade dispute filings that nobody else wanted to touch. My name is Mara Vass. I am a liaison officer grade 7 assigned to the Galactic Compact's Concord Station. My job in its most honest form is to sit between species who dislike each other and make sure the disliking stays verbal. I am very good at my job. I have been very good at my job for 11 years. Nothing has ever happened on my watch that a strongly worded document could not fix. The message that came through at 3:40 changed the shape of that sentence permanently. It was flagged priority absolute, which is a classification I had seen exactly once before during a San collective border incident that turned out to be a mapping error. I opened it expecting another mapping error. I read the first line. I read the second line. I set my coffee down very carefully because my hand had started doing something I did not tell it to do. Kepler's reach was gone. Not evacuated, not damaged, gone. 40,000 people who had been alive when I went to bed were now a territorial claim filed by the Veth Empire, timestamped 4 minutes after the last distress signal cut out. They had destroyed the colony and submitted the paperwork simultaneously, like a receipt, like 40,000 lives were a transaction that needed documenting. I sat in my chair for a while. The coffee dispenser made its dying engine sound. I pulled up the incident report form. Standard section headers, date, location, parties involved. I filled them in the way I had filled in 200 forms before this one. My hand steadied. Procedure does that. It gives you something to hold while the floor moves under you. I got to section 7. Casualties. I typed the number. Something happened in my chest. Not pain exactly, not grief exactly. Something older than either of those words, something that felt like a door I did not know existed, had just swung open. An inch and cold air was coming through it. I finished the form. I filed it. I opened the secure diplomatic channel and notified Director Leonhardt at Earth Central that I had processed the initial report and was awaiting instruction. I used the correct formal register. I did not editorialize. 11 years of training held. Then I sat back and I thought about Kepler's reach. I had never been there. It was a small colony, less than a decade old. Agricultural. The kind of place people went when they wanted open sky and dark nights, and the particular quiet of land that had not been loud yet. 40,000 people who grew food and watched stars and probably complained about the rain and had names for the local insects. Now they were a number in my section. 7. The emergency session of the compact convened at 700. I attended as Earth's duty liaison. The chamber was full in a way I had not seen before. Every species present, every seat taken, the air carrying the specific tension of people who have been watching something they hoped would not happen and now have to decide what to say about the fact that it has. The Veth ambassador, a tall being called Varath, stood at the center podium and presented the territorial claim with the calm of someone who had rehearsed the presentation several times. He cited historical navigational rights. He cited resource priority clauses in the pre-compact treaties. He cited a jurisdictional overlap dating back 300 years that his legal team had apparently spent considerable time locating. He did not say the word colony. He did not say the word people. He said the phrase settled occupation zone 4 times. I wrote it down each time. Old habit. Secretary General Hannah O. sat at the head of the human delegation table. She was 70 years old, small, with gray hair, cut short, and a face that had spent 3 decades expressing patience in rooms full of beings who were testing it. I had worked under her for 4 years. I had never heard her raise her voice. I had never seen her expression shift faster than a tide. She let Verath finish. She let the full presentation conclude. She waited through the procedural pause that followed. Then she picked up the physical copy of the territorial claim that her aide had printed and placed before her. She read it, all of it, every page. The chamber was quiet enough that I could hear the Marian delegate across the room breathing. She set it down. She looked at Verath. She said one word. I am not going to write what word it was. You could search every formal diplomatic record of the last 4,000 years of human history, and you would not find it. It existed before the peace. It belonged to a register of human language that we had not needed since then, a snorts register that had no place in compact proceedings or liaison reports or any document I had ever filed. It was not a threat. It was not a declaration. It was a recognition. It meant we see what you did and we know what you have started, and we are no longer pretending otherwise. Verath's shoulders went still. His species register shock through the shoulders. Both of his had been moving slightly the way they do when a being is confident and comfortable. They stopped moving when O said her word. The draft ambassador to my left leaned 1 inch closer to me and said, very quietly, in the trade pigeon we used informally, I have never heard a human say that. Neither have I said. What does it mean? I thought about how to answer that. Honestly, it means the math changed, I said. He did not ask me to explain. Something in my voice must have told him that the explanation was not something he wanted to receive in detail. The session broke for recess 20 minutes. Later, I walked back to my office and stood at the window that faced the star field and thought about the word Os had said. I thought about the fact that I had recognized it. I had never heard it spoken aloud, never in my lifetime, but I had recognized it the way you recognize the smell of rain before it arrives. Something in me had been waiting for it. That was the part I kept coming back to. Not the anger, though the anger was there's low and warm and getting warmer. Not the grief, though that was there too, sitting heavy in the space behind my ribs. The recognition, the ease of it. I had spent 11 years being very good at peace, choosing the careful word, the measured tone, the document that closed doors gently instead of slamming them. I had been proud of that. I was still proud of it. But when O said her word, something in me did not flinch. Something in me nodded. That was the part I sat with, alone in my office, while the coffee dispenser made its sound and the stars outside stayed exactly where they had always been. Everything the same, everything different. My personal log entry that night was 3 sentences. Kepler's reaches gone, 40,000 people. Erased for a territorial claim filed. Like a receipt, we were so polite for so long. I did not finish the thought. I did not need to. I closed the log. I pulled up my transfer request form, not because anyone had told me to, not because I had orders, because the door in my chest was open now, and the cold air coming through it felt like something I had always known. The building in Geneva had no sign. I had walked past it twice before I checked the address against my transfer orders and accepted that I was, in fact, standing in front of the right place. It was 4 stories, older construction, windows that let in light without advertising what was behind them, a door that opened with a standard security clearance and made no sound doing it. Inside it was clean, organized, and absolutely full of people who looked exactly like me, administrators, analysts, liaison officers, people who had spent careers in rooms where the loudest thing was a disagreement about treaty language. We all had the same expression, the look of people who have just discovered that the room they thought was a storage closet was actually a hallway, and the hallway goes somewhere. General Petra Cole met me in the briefing room on the 2nd floor. She was 34 years old, which I had known from her file, but which still registered as a small surprise when I saw her in person. She wore her insignia like she was still getting used to the weight of it. Her handshake was firm and fast, the handshake of someone who does not want to waste a second of what she has been given. Liaison Officer Voss, she said. Welcome to preparedness. I didn't know preparedness existed, I said. Most people don't. She gestured to the chair across from her. That's part of its job. She walked me through the divisions, history, and the time it took to drink 1 cup of coffee. Established quietly, 400 years into the peace, by a Secretary General whose name I recognized from history files. Maintained continuously since then. Funded through an allocation buried in the compact infrastructure budget under a line item labeled Long-Term Structural Review. Who maintains the equipment? I asked, because I had seen the facility overview. And the equipment was not dusty. It was not old. It was maintained. Volunteers, Cole said. I waited. People who read the historical files. She said, people who understood that the peace was a choice, not a permanent condition. They didn't want to be caught without options if the choice ever had to change. She paused. There have always been people like that, every generation. They never advertised it. I thought about that for a long moment. About all the years I had filed trade dispute forms and managed border complaints and felt quietly good about the fact that humanity had spent 4,000 years being the most boring species in the compact, about the Geneva building with no sign. We were so good at peace. I had always thought that meant we had left the other thing behind. We had not left it behind. We had simply kept it somewhere quiet, tended to by volunteers who read files and polished equipment and hoped the day would not come, and prepared for it anyway. That distinction felt important. I was still working out why the next 3 days moved differently than any 3 days I had experienced before. The preparedness division did not operate on diplomatic time, which is slow and measured and full of waiting. It operated on a different clock. Entirely, one I did not have a name for, yet but which I felt in my sternum. Every morning when I came in, and every night when I left, Director Leonhardt arrived from Earth. Central on the second day, he was 60, lean, with a quality of stillness about him that I had always read as calm, and was now reading with fresh eyes as something more deliberate than calm. He had a meeting scheduled with the Compact's Mediation Council at noon. Before that, at 9:00 in the morning, he sat down with Cole and me and read the Veth Empire's formal response to our preliminary protest. The Veth had proposed a compensation package. They had assigned a numerical value to the losses at Kepler's reach. The figure was presented in standard compact exchange units calculated against the colony's assessed economic output and projected regional value. It had been prepared by a team of Veth financial assessors. It was, by any technical measure, a thorough document. Hart read it. He did not move while he read it. He did not make a sound. Then he set it down and looked at the middle distance for a moment. They put a number on it, he said, not angry, not loud, just placing the fact in the air where we could all look at it. Yes, Cole said. He picked up the document again, looked at the figure on the second page, and set it back down. What is our response? I asked. You're writing it, he said. He looked at me steadily. One page clear. Language, no economic framing, no technical register. I wrote it that afternoon. I sat at a clean desk with a clean screen, and I thought about 40,000 people who grew food and watched stars, and I wrote the response in the simplest language I could find. The Veth Empire's proposed compensation structure is not accepted. The question of compensation is not presently relevant. What is relevant is the following: withdraw all Veth presence from the former territory of Kepler's reach and its surrounding navigation corridors. Withdrawal must be complete. The deadline for full withdrawal is listed below. The deadline I listed was 22 days out. I sent it to Hart. He read it. He sent it back with one word added at the bottom after my name in a font size slightly smaller than the body text. The word was completely. He had underlined it. I reread the document. The word changed. Nothing technically, it changed. Everything tonally. It said, we are not leaving room for partial compliance, creative interpretation, or the kind of withdrawal that leaves two ships and a communications relay behind and calls itself complete. I resubmitted it. He approved it. It went out on the official channel at 1700 station time. The Veth ambassador's response came in at 1712. He was on video. His shoulders were moving with the rhythm of the Veth expression I had spent years cataloging as confident amusement, both of them loose and easy, rising and falling. 22 days, he said in the compacts. Trade common. He repeated the number as if checking whether he had heard it correctly. You are giving us 22 days. 22 days, I confirmed, because I was the one who happened to be on duty when the call came in. And if we do not meet this deadline. I looked at him. I thought about the Geneva building with no sign, about the volunteers who polished equipment for 4 centuries because they believed in keeping options open, about Asai's word in the chamber, and how every shoulder in the room had gone still. Then the math changes, I said. He laughed, his species laughs with the whole upper body. It looked convincing. It looked like genuine amusement at the audacity of a species that had not fired a weapon in 4,000 years, issuing deadlines to an interstellar empire. His shoulders, though. His shoulders had gone still when he started laughing. I noted that in my report. I filed it under a new section I created that evening because no existing section covered it adequately. I labeled it Behavioral Indicators. Pre-conflict assessment. I had never created a section like that before. It came naturally. That was the part that stayed with me through the night, long after the building had gone quiet in Geneva. Outside was dark and still, not the deadline, not the Veth ambassadors. Laughter, the ease of the new section. The fact that my hands had not hesitated. 4,000 years is a long time, but it is not long enough to change what you are underneath. It is only long enough to make you forget that you knew. The fleet formed up at 600 on the 19th day. I watched it on the tactical display from the operations deck of a ship called the Covenant of the Meek, which is genuinely its registered name, assigned by a committee that I can only assume had a sense of irony. The display was a three-dimensional grid, rendered in soft blue light, and the ships appeared on it one by one as they reached formation coordinates, each one a small white point that meant engines, crew, and everything humanity had been quietly maintaining in buildings with no signs. I started counting the points. I stopped at a number that made something shift in my stomach. Not fear, exactly, but the body's acknowledgement of scale. The acknowledgement that this was not a document, this was not a carefully worded page with a deadline underlined. This was the answer to the deadline. Admiral Owen Garrick stood 3 FT to my left watching the same display. He was 51, a man who moved the way deep water moves slow at the surface, and you never see what is underneath until it is already moving. He had not said much since I came aboard. He said things when they needed saying, nothing before that. They'll expect 12 ships, I said. Maybe 15. I know, he said. How many are we sending? He looked at the display. He did not answer immediately. All of them, I said. No, he said. He said it the way you say a word that has a larger word behind it. Not all of them. I looked at the white points again and absorbed the fact that this was not all of them, that there was another number larger that existed somewhere beyond what I was looking at. The compact observer channel opened at 6:15, standard protocol for any military movement requiring coalition notification. 17 species were on the line. The Dreth ambassador's voice came through first, which meant he had been waiting at his console. Liaison Officer Voss, he said, we are observing your fleet formation. Pause. How many ships are you deploying? I gave him the number. 11 seconds of silence. Is that all of them? He said. I remembered Garrett's answer. I borrowed it. No, I said. He did not speak again for the rest of the observation window. The Veth had positioned their fleet at the edge of the former Kepler's reach territory, 9 warships and a command vessel, which by compact military standards was a substantial regional force, enough to hold a contested territory, enough to deter most species from pushing back hard on a completed action. They had positioned it the way a species positions of force when it expects the response to be political, not physical. Enough weight to make negotiating seem more reasonable than confronting. It is a rational calculation. It works. Very often. It works on species that approach war. The way they approach a fever, hot and urgent and expensive, something to be avoided because the cost is too visible. We do not approach it that way. My grandmother, who had been a historian before she retired to grow tomatoes in a difficult climate and complain about it, used to say that the scariest thing about humans is not that we fight. She said it at dinner once when I was 12, between passing the bread and commenting on the rain, the way she delivered all of her most important observations sideways without ceremony, so they landed before you had time to brace. The scariest thing about humans, she said, is that we study before we fight. We sit down, we read, we take notes for generations, we map the patterns and identify the gaps, and then when the time comes, we do not improvise, we execute. 4,000 years of peace meant 4,000 years of watching every conflict in the compact, every war between other species, every tactical engagement, every strategic error, and every successful doctrine. We had files, we had analysis, we had quiet people, quiet rooms who had spent their careers reading those files and writing assessments that nobody in the diplomatic corps ever needed to request. Until the 19th day, Garrett's fleet did not charge the VEF position, it did not broadcast a challenge or demand immediate surrender, or perform any of the gestures that signal a hot, urgent, expensive kind of war. It simply moved into every exit vector simultaneously, not aggressively, methodically, the way you close the windows in a house before a storm, one by one, without drama, because the storm is coming and you are simply being practical about it. The VEF command vessel opened a channel at 7:14. This formation is an act of aggression. Under Compact Article 9, the VEF fleet commander said her name was Shara, and her voice had the tight quality of a being reciting a legal position she had prepared and is now finding insufficient. It is a formation, Garrett said. Article 9 requires hostile action to trigger. We have not taken hostile action. You are surrounding our fleet. We are in open space, Garrett said. We are not in contact with your vessels. We have not fired. We have not broadcast a threat. We have asked no one to surrender. He paused. We are simply here. Another pause from the VEF side. I could hear very faintly the sound of other voices in the background of their channel, the sound of a room full of people recalculating. At 7:41, the VEF fleet made its first move. One ship broke from the formation toward the nearest exit corridor. The corridor had 3 of our ships in it. The VEF ship slowed, held position. Corridor was not blocked. Our ships were simply in it, present, available. The mathematical message of what happened if the VEF ship continued was not stated. It did not need to be. The VEF ship returned to formation. At 8:09, the VEF fleet supply line communication node went dark, not destroyed, just dark. One of our ships had moved between it and the relay point, quietly, efficiently, without announcement. At 8:34, a second node went dark. Then a third. Each one separate. Each one preceded by enough time for the VEF fleet to observe what was happening and understand the sequence. We were not cutting their communication at once, which would have been faster. We were cutting it one piece at a time, slowly, enough that they experienced each loss as a distinct event, understood what was next, and had time to think about it. My grandmother called it reading comprehension at a strategic level, making sure the other party has time to understand every sentence before you move to the next one. The Veth Fleet commander opened another channel at 9:12. You are disabling our communication infrastructure, she said. We are present in open space, Garrett said. We have not taken hostile action. The channel closed. At 10:23, the command vessel broadcast a fleet-wide signal. I did not need translation. The body language of a retreating formation is the same in every species, the same way a retreating tide looks the same regardless of what ocean you're watching. They were withdrawing, not because we had destroyed them, not because we had fired a single round, because the exit corridors were covered, and the supply lines were dark, and the math of continuing was no longer a math that produced a favorable outcome, and they were a rational species, and rational species respond to math. The withdrawal took 4 hours, clean, organized, the Veth Fleet pulling back in the same order they had arrived. Professional, I noted that too. They were not panicking, they were reading the room. At 14:41, the last Veth vessel cleared the former territory boundary. Garrett stood at the display and watched the final white point representing a Veth ship move off the edge of the grid. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Draft the post-engagement transmission." I wrote it at the small desk they had assigned me on the operations deck, with the tactical display still glowing blue. In my peripheral vision, the transmission was 3 sentences. The first acknowledged the withdrawal. The second confirmed that our fleet would hold its current position for a specified review period. The third moved the remaining diplomatic deadline up by 30 days. Not because we needed 30 more days, because the 30-day reduction said something that a longer statement could not. It said, we were serious before. We are more serious now. We want this resolved before we have to have a different kind of conversation. I sent it to Garrett. He read it. He added nothing. He sent it out. The compact observer channel, which had been silent for most of the engagement, filled with voices immediately after the transmission went. 14 different species, several speaking over each other. I caught phrases in 4 different languages, fragments of reactions, running from impressed to deeply unsettled. The Dreth ambassador found the human channel at 15:08. He asked for me specifically. That was, he said, and then paused. And I had the impression of a being searching for the correct category and not quite finding it. That was a message. It was a withdrawal, I said. It was a message delivered through a withdrawal, he said. He had always been precise, the sequence, the supply lines in order, the exit corridors covered. Before the action began, another pause. You planned this before you arrived. We plan, I said. Every contingency. Most of them. A longer pause. How long have you been planning for this specific contingency? He asked. I thought about the Geneva building with no sign, the volunteers, the files, the 400 years of quiet maintenance. A while, I said. He did not ask a follow-up. I think he had done his own math. That night I sat in my quarters on the Covenant of the Meek and wrote in my log I meant to write about the engagement, about the tactical sequence, about what it had felt like to watch the display and see the exit corridors close, one by one. Instead, I wrote, we were so good at peace, 4,000 years of being the most boring species in the compact. I was proud of that. I'm still proud of that. I want to keep being proud of that. I stopped writing and looked at what I had put down. I wrote one more line. I want to remember what the other thing costs even when it works. I closed the log, outside the viewport. The stars were where they had always been. Everything the same. The math permanently different. The compact emergency session that followed the engagement was held on neutral ground at Station Verath, and Earth sent a junior attaché named Colin Page. Colin was 26 years old, excellent posture, recently graduated from the diplomatic track, and completely unaware that sending him instead of a senior delegate was itself the communication. He gave the opening statement from the human block in clear, respectful language. He answered procedural questions accurately. He had no idea that every non-human in that chamber was looking at the empty seat behind him, the one that should have held a senior official, and reading it correctly. We did not send a senior official because we did not need one. That was what the empty seat said. The matter had been addressed. We were present out of courtesy. I was not at that session. I was in Geneva. The building with no sign had acquired, in the days following the engagement, a quality that I can only describe as density. More people moving through it, more channels open, more quiet conversations in corridors. That ended when doors closed. Not panic, not celebration, the specific focused energy of people doing work that has been waiting to be done for longer than any of them have been alive. I sat across from Director Hart in a small conference room on the third floor and watched him read the VETH Empire's formal ceasefire request. It had come through back channels, not through official compact processes. That was the first signal. The second was the language register. Whoever in the VETH Foreign Ministry had drafted the request had gone into an archive, a very old archive, and found the formal register that predated the peace. The register that human diplomatic tradition had last used 4,000 years ago, in the period before the choice that made us what we had been since then. It said in the formal terms of that older register, we see you, we understand what we encountered, we are requesting that this stop. Hart read it twice, then he looked at me. They found the old register, I said. Yes, he said. Someone on their team spent time in an archive for that, I said. Yes, he said, that is worth knowing. It was worth knowing because it meant that somebody in the VETH Foreign Ministry was both intelligent enough and motivated enough to locate, study, and use a diplomatic register that had been inactive for 4 millennia. That person understood that the standard channels and the standard language were insufficient for what they were trying to communicate. They needed words that carried a specific weight, and they went and found them. That was a species capable of learning. That was a species that, when confronted with something they did not have a framework for, went to a library instead of escalating. I noted it. I wrote it in my personal assessment, which nobody had asked for. Old habit. Secretary General Asai took the ceasefire meeting personally. It was held in a small room, not the main chamber. The VETH delegation was 3 people, the senior envoy whose name was Dorath, and 2 aides who stayed near the wall and did not speak. Dorath was older than Vereth, the ambassador I had seen in the initial session, and he moved with a different kind of weight, not the confidence of someone who has rehearsed a presentation, the weight of someone who has been sent to fix something and understands the difficulty of the task. I sat along the wall on the human side. Asai sat at the table. Her aide, a young woman named Laura Finch, sat to her left, with a recording device and the same expression of concentrated stillness that all of Asai's aides eventually developed. Dorath spoke for 38 minutes. I timed it. He covered the Veth Empire's legal position on the original territorial claim. He covered their historical navigation rights. He covered the economic pressures that had driven the expansion into Kepler's Reach corridor. He covered their genuine assessment that the action would not provoke significant response based on 4,000 years of human conduct in the compact. He was thorough, precise, and honest in a way that I had not anticipated, and the honesty of it made the room feel different than I had expected. He was not making excuses. He was explaining a miscalculation. There is a difference, and he knew the difference, and he made sure Asai knew that he knew. Asai listened to all 38 minutes without speaking. Her face did nothing. I had seen her face do nothing for 4 years, and I had always read it as patience. I was reading it differently now. It was not patience. It was the expression of a person who has already decided and is giving the other party the full and unedited courtesy of being heard before the decision is executed. When Dorath finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she accepted the ceasefire on the terms Earth had already submitted. No renegotiation of the withdrawal boundaries, no adjustment to the compliance timeline, no economic framework for the Kepler's Reach losses. To be determined later. That determination had already been made, and the terms were not monetary. The terms were a permanent adjustment to the Veth Empire's territorial boundaries along the entire Kepler's Reach corridor, a formal notation in the compact record, and a specific clause about the nature of Earth's response to any future actions of a similar kind. That clause was 3 sentences. Dorath read it once. He did not react visibly. Then he read it again. This clause, he said, it does not specify a response. No, Asai said. It says only that there will be one. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back with the expression that was not patience. That is more effective than specification, he said. Yes, she said. He signed the document. After the Veth delegation left, Asai sat for a moment in the quiet room. Laura Finch closed the recording device. I started gathering my materials from the wall seat, the automatic motion of someone who knows a meeting is over and has another one in an hour. Myra, Asai said. I stopped. Sit for a moment, she said. I sat. She was looking at the table, not the document, just the table, the flat surface of it, the grain of whatever material it was made from. I had seen her do this before in the seconds after a difficult session, and I had always thought it was a reset, a breath, the small private ceremony of putting one thing down before picking up the next. 40,000 people, she said. Yes, I said. I want to make sure we keep that number close, she said, through all of this. The sessions, the clauses, the back channel requests in old registers. I want to keep that number somewhere where it does not get filed. I thought about my Section 7, cursor blinking after I typed the number, the thing that happened in my chest that I did not have a word for. I have it, I said. She nodded once. She stood. She picked up her copy of the signed document and walked out. I sat alone in the small room for a moment. Laura Snort's Finch had already gone. The recording device was off. It was just me and the table and the particular quiet of a room where something has been decided. That night I sat in my apartment in Geneva, a small place, one window, a kitchen I did not use enough, and I wrote the longest personal log entry I had written since the beginning of all this. I wrote about the session, about Dorothy's 38 minutes, about the clause that did not specify a response. I wrote about Asa's instruction to keep the number close. Then I stopped writing, and I sat in the chair by the window, and I looked at the city outside, the lights of it, the ordinary continuity of a world that had been going about its business while all of this happened. People making food, having conversation, sleeping badly, watching something on a screen, sending messages to people they missed. 40,000 people who had been doing all of those same things. I held the number the way Ossie had asked. I did not put it down. The strange thing, the thing I kept returning to, was not the grief, though. The grief was present, and I did not push it away. The strange thing was the question underneath the grief, the one I had been circling since the first night in my office with the coffee dispenser making its sound. We had been so good at peace, 4,000 years of it, real and sustained and genuinely practiced, not just performed. We had built things, we had contributed. We had been the most boring species in the compact, and we had been proud of that. And then something crossed a line, and the thing underneath came up so fast. No hesitation, no learning curve, no period of adjustment where we remember. Hell, we just remembered all of it like it had never left. I did not know how to feel about that. I did not know if there was a feeling available for it. I sat with the question the way you sit with something that does not have an answer. Yet, not because the answer does not exist, but because you have not been patient with it long enough. The city outside kept going. The window was cold against the air outside. Lights were ordinary and steady. 40,000 people had watched stars from Kepler's reach and called the insects by names. I kept the number. I did not file it. Kepler's reach smelled like turned soil, and the particular kind of quiet that comes after a place has been empty. I was there for the memorial, which was held on a clear day with a sky so large it made the people standing under it look like they were standing inside something. They were, in a way, they were inside the fact of what had happened, all of them. The survivors who had not been on the colony when it was destroyed, the families, the compact observers, the journalists, the two Veth diplomats who had come as part of the normalized relations process and who stood slightly apart from the crowd with the careful posture of beings who understand they are present on sufferance and are making every effort not to waste it. The memorial itself was a simple structure, a wall of names, all 40,000 of them, every person who had been at Kepler's reach when the Veth Empire or filed their receipt. The wall was not tall, it was long in the way that says there were a great many. I stood in front of it for a while. I read names, not all of them there were too many, but I read the ones near me. And I let them be specific, let them be distinct. Let each one be a person who had an argument with someone about the weather or a favorite spot to watch the night sky or a running joke with a friend they had brought from somewhere else. I did not file them, I kept them. After the memorial, the rebuilding continued. It had already been going on for several weeks. Humans build fast when they have decided to build, and the decision had been made clearly and early. New structures going up, new agricultural infrastructure, new communication relays, people who had signed on for the second settlement, and there had been many of them, more than the original colony, which said something about what moves people toward a thing rather than away from it, were already arriving in the early waves. I watched a crew put in a foundation and thought about the Geneva building with no sign, the volunteers, the maintenance, done quietly across 4 centuries by people who understood that some things need to be kept available even when you hope you will never need them. This was the other side of that same quality. Something had been destroyed. We were putting it back. We were putting it back larger, because that too was a kind of statement, and we understood statements. The compact restructured in the months following the ceasefire. It did not restructure loudly. It restructured the way water finds a new path when the old one is rerouted, gradually, without announcement, following the shape of what now existed. The human bloc gained seats on 3 additional councils without requesting them. The requests came from other species. The Dareth brought the first proposal, which I thought was fitting, given the number of times his shoulders had communicated useful information to me over the preceding weeks. The Marian Federation and the San Collective both submitted their own proposals within a month. I wrote the acceptance briefs for all 3. Careful language, measured tone, appropriate gratitude. I was still good at that. I was glad I was still good at that. Director Hart reviewed all 3 acceptances before they went out. He made no changes to the language. He added a note to the bottom of my draft for the Marian Federation proposal, the small handwritten script he used for personal observations. The note said, "Good work, Voss, both kinds." I sat with that for a while. Both kinds meant the documents, the careful words, the measured register, the craft of building structures in language that hold things in place. It also meant the other kind, the section I had created with no hesitation, the cold air through the open door. I was still working out how to hold both of those things at the same time. I thought I might be working it out for a long time. The Marian Federation sent a cultural exchange delegation 8 weeks after the ceasefire. Their official communication described it as an initiative to deepen mutual understanding in the post-incident period. Their briefing document, the one that came through the diplomatic assessment channel rather than the public announcement channel, described it more honestly. They wanted to know if we were stable. I was assigned to receive the delegation, which was either a vote of confidence in my people's skills or a decision to put someone in the room who had been close enough to all of it to answer questions without needing to consult files. The delegation was 7 people or 7 beings, their species presenting in forms that are humanoid enough for comfortable interaction, but different enough that you are always aware of the difference. Their lead representative was a woman by their gender conventions named Thessaly, which I thought was a beautiful name. She was precise and warm simultaneously, the combination that characterizes very good diplomats regardless of species. We had a formal dinner on the first evening. Standard format, good food, the kind of conversation that covers safe ground while both sides assess the texture of the other's reasoning. I had done this many times. I was good at it. Thessaly found me at the edge of the reception afterward, near the large viewport that showed the station's exterior and beyond it the ordinary stars. Liaison Officer Voss, she said. Myra is fine, I said. She accepted that with a small gesture. That meant the same as a nod in her culture. May I ask you something? Directly. That's the kind of conversation I prefer, I said. She looked at the stars for a moment. Then she looked at me. Were you always like this? She said. Were humans always the way you are? Now, it was the question I had been carrying since the first night in my office with the coffee dispenser, since the Geneva building with no sign, since Osa's word in the chamber and the recognition I felt in my chest when she said it. I looked at the stars. I thought about 40,000 people watching them from Kepler's reach. I thought about the volunteers who had maintained equipment for 400 years because they believed in keeping options available. I thought about my grandmother passing bread and delivering important observations. Sideways, I thought about Garrett's fleet moving into every exit corridor simultaneously, quietly without drama, because the exit corridors needed to be covered before anything else. I thought about the wall of names, the length of it. We grew into it, I said. She waited because she was a good diplomat and she could tell the sentence was not finished. But I found that it was, in fact, finished. Every continuation I considered felt like explanation, and the point did not need explanation. It needed to sit the way Osa sat with things that were true and difficult and not made simpler by talking around them. Thessaly looked at me for a moment. She had the expression of a being processing a statement that carries more than it appears to. That is either reassuring, she said, or it is the most unsettling thing I have heard in my career. I know, I said. We stood together at the viewport for a while after that, both of us looking out at the stars, and neither of us said anything else, because sometimes the accurate thing and the comfortable thing are pointed in different directions, and the only honest response to that is to let them both be there. I filed the cultural exchange report the following week. It was thorough, professionally written, and snorts and clears throat ran to 14 pages of careful diplomatic language. It recommended the continuation of formal ties between Earth and the Myrian Federation and proposed 3 specific areas for collaborative engagement. My personal log that night was shorter. Thessaly asked if we were always this way. I told her we grew into it. I still am not sure if that is true. I think we were always this way, and the 4,000 years of peace was us deciding to grow into something else, something patient and constructive and capable of passing bread at dinner while saying the most important things. I think both of those things exist in us simultaneously. And I do not think one is the real version and one is the mask. I think we are the species that maintained weapons in a building with no sign for 400 years because we genuinely hoped we would never need them. I think we are also the species that needed 3 hours to cover every exit corridor. I think the distance between those two things is not a contradiction. I think it might be the most honest description of us that exists, capable of the deepest patience and the most complete preparedness, both at once, both real, neither canceling the other out. Kepler's reach was growing again when I last received an update from the colony liaison. First crop planted, first harvest. Estimated, new arrivals settling into the particular rhythms of a place that is being built rather than inherited. The wall of names stood at the center of the settlement where it would always stand, where no one would be able to walk through without seeing it, without reading the nearest names, without letting them be specific. I kept the number, I did not file it. I went back to work, trade dispute filings, border complaint assessments, the careful documents that hold things in place. I was still good at this. I intended to stay good at it. The door in my chest was still open and the cold air still came through. I had stopped thinking of that as a warning. I had started thinking of it as information. We were here. We had been here for a long time. We had built things and grown food and watched stars and argued about weather and given names to insects on dark colony worlds. We had maintained things in buildings with no signs. We had kept numbers closed and not filed them. We had been polite for 4,000 years. We remembered when we needed to that politeness was always a choice. And the thing that made the choice meaningful, the only thing that ever made it mean anything at all, was that we were always capable of choosing differently. We just needed a reason. We had one now. We went back to work.